Multiply your wealth with US textiles. Exactly this week, we saw this happen after the judge ruling that yes, Google may have monopoly, but they do need to sell off quote. The exclusive contract with Apple can still remain. Just look at Apple share prices and Google share prices zooming out this week. Now, essentially, Google was actually one of our stock that we talked about 3 years ago when we presented to our investors. Let me share in this week's video how I think Google will be my next 10 million stock. Yes, let me just repeat for you. I think that Google will be my next 10 million stock. Now, in this week's video, I'm going to share with you how I'm going to achieve that and basically how long it will take. One feature about US tech stocks that most analysts miss out, especially in this part of the world, is this. Just look at essentially this is a cash flow statement of Google in the last couple of years. You can see, ladies and gentlemen, why we love tech stocks in the US and particularly Google is this. If we just look at just 3 years ago when we first recommended stock, the operating cash flow is 91.6 billion as against its net profit reported of 76 billion. Now notice that the operating cash flow is almost 20 billion higher than the net profit. Now this is an extraordinary company which actually generates more cash than the reported net profit. So this is something to go on. Now essentially it has not failed us as of last year. You can see 2024. The operating cash flow has now skyrocketed to 127.6 billion versus a reported net profit of 96 billion. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the disparity in this case, has widened even further to by additional 10 billion to approximately 127 minus 96, 30 billion. As of this year, as we speak, the market consensus is that you're looking at about 120 billion to be reported in net profit. Now, why is that important? Because if we move further into this next slide, you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that essentially now this is a extraordinary profitable business, and that's what we're looking for. To enhance our portfolio and multiply our wealth, we look for monopoly or near monopolies. Even the judge at the Google case have admitted that essentially it's a monopoly or close to monopolistic competition, and that's what we're looking at. Exactly what Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, which has been close to our heart, has always mentioned. Look at businesses with strong economic moat. Now, at GCP Global, we go further. We want to not only just look at companies and businesses with strong economic moat, we want the numbers to show clearly that they are benefiting from this monopoly or monopolistic position, and more importantly, to see how sustainable it will be. Now, how sustainable in Google's case, just look at the profitable numbers that's coming through. Now, this is actually a forecast from UBS, the most bearish, yes, the most pessimistic outlook in Wall Street on Google numbers. Yes, we're purposefully tried to be ultra conservative by showing you the worst or the most pessimistic forecast, and this is actually coming from UBS. So they are looking at a 119, almost 120 billion in terms of net profit for this current year 2025, which will extend out to about 187 billion by the year 2029. Now, this of course pessimistic because in the last couple of years, if you look at the compounded annual rate of return since we recommended the stock, the net profit have actually grown, 30% on average between 2021 to this particular year. So even if we don't take, a 30% annual growth, you can easily see just 20% growth, the net profit extending out to 2029 based on a 20% conservative, that's 10 basis points, rather 100 basis points lower than the last few years. You can see that it will hit a net profit of 249 billion, which we will show to you later. Now, the other characteristics of strong monopolistic businesses, as you can see from here, is that this is a business that actually generate using 2025 numbers, that if they actually achieve 391 billion at the revenue level, uh, roughly 30%, in this case 35%, 1 to 0 billion will filter down to the bottom line, meaning that this is after paying for depreciation, paying for capital expenditure, paying for taxes and interest and what have you. And these are actually the kind of money that can be returned to shareholders via share buyback or dividend. And that's basically what we're looking for. Yes, as GCP Global Classes, we concentrate on multiplying our wealth with solid compounders. And solid compounders in terms of Google and Apple basically come through strong balance sheet, which actually emanates through the numbers. And in our classes, we highlight these numbers to you way in advance. So when the share prices actually go on a tremendous run, as what Google and Apple have showed this way, as well as Broadcom, you will not be surprised. In fact, you will be surprised at how fantastic your wealth will grow. And that's what GCP Global stands for. What is it like to have one stock worth 10 million in your portfolio? This is exactly what I want to show you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to show you that this is my position in Google. This is something I've shown to you 3 years ago and follow up with all my GCP Global students as well as my YouTube videos. Look at my past YouTube videos. You notice that this is my statement with UBS, Invest Private Banking. So as of now, I have 12,400 shares, as you can see, as well as I've shown in the last few videos. Now at the bottom, you can see that my cost price was 115, and right now have just doubled. That's 2x my return on Google because my market gain right now is roughly 1.8 million for 1.7 million that was invested, or a total return of 103% in just 3 years. So this is based on yesterday's closing of Google at 235 on Friday the 5th of September. So this means that 235 multiplied by 12,400 shares multiplied by the current exchange rate between Singapore dollar and US, roughly about 1.285. The total market value of my position in Google is worth 3.7 million. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it took 3 years to double. But does it mean that I need to wait another 3 years or 6 years for it to even triple? You know, um, that would then bring the value of my position in Google to about $10 million, and that's what we are going to find out. Now, my next slide is something that I do iteratively. I just want to show you, for example, that if the most pessimistic forecast by UBS actually pans out for this year, the net profit on Google is going to be about 120 billion. Now, if you use a compound growth of 20% for the next 4 years, that means between now, to 6 to 7 to 8 and to 9, 20%, which is 10% lower than the average of the last couple of years. I'm going to get Google net profit at 249 billion, or roughly 250 billion. Now, look at the number of shares of Google. Right now, it's about 12.2 billion. And one of the key things is that the idea that US companies, especially the strong ones, are able to generate huge amount of cash, which I showed you at the beginning, and they're able to buy back a lot of shares, actually tells you that to be able to achieve your 10 million value in terms of just position in one stock, in this case Google, can be much faster. Because I just want to show you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you look at this chart, you can see that since in the last couple of years, Google has been the third performing and the third highest buying back companies. So, for example, on a quarterly basis, since the fourth Q of 2023, Google has been buying roughly about 15 billion worth of stocks every other quarters. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, take your mind back. It's roughly 15 billion per quarter, or roughly 60 billion per year. And if we look just at the last set of results, Google's CEO Sundar Pichai has guided that the share buyback is going to go even higher by another 10 billion to 70 billion for this current financial year. Now, what does this mean, ladies and gentlemen? So if I actually work back the numbers, look at the third line. Now, if Google do a 70 billion share buyback between now until 2029, I'm not even assuming that the buyback amount increases, which in this year they have from 60 billion to 70 billion. Roughly, Google should be able to buy back around 400 to 500 million shares based on the current price of 235 years at the highest. Now, just imagine if it goes even lower, you can actually buy back more shares, which means it's 2.2 billion thereabouts. So this means that come 2029, Google number of shares may decrease even further from 12.2 billion down to 10 billion. Now, if you ask me, Google share price at the beginning of this decade, in terms of number of shares, they were actually close to about 15 billion. So, can you imagine that the power of a share buyback through buying and identifying companies where the free cash flow is much higher than net profit? Now, this is a key thing when it comes to investments in US stocks, and this is something that a lot of analysts miss. So because by then, for example, the EPS in 2029 numbers, assuming that Google achieved a net profit of 249 billion, based again on very conservative 20% growth between now until 2029, it's going to be 25 cents. Now, 25 cents based on the average of the Magnificent Six. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we cover the Magnificent Six stocks, and it's in our core portfolio. So if you take the average P of the Magnificent Six, currently priced at about 26, I'm only using a discount, at 25. I get a share price of 625. So if I use 625, ladies and gentlemen, multiplied by the number of shares that I currently hold at 12,400, I get close to 10 million. That's how I'm going to achieve and get to Google at $10 million. Now, my purpose of doing this video, ladies and gentlemen, is to showcase essentially that you can actually make millions in equities and in your investments, even you only know how. Now, in this age of excessive social media, where you do not know who to listen to, I just want to showcase you that essentially you can make $1 million, let alone $10 million from someone that you can listen to and know and learn reliably. And this is actually us. Now, essentially, it is my journey to get to my next 10 million stock, and I just want to show in social media so that you can actually follow me. Because between now and the next 5 years, it's going to be a lot of excessive noise. Now, how to tune out this excessive noise from the market, as well as actually a lot of deviations? Well, let me just show you how I prepare, physically on that. The path towards 10 million is fraught every day with a lot of noises from the market. So what do you do as an investor as you stay focused towards a 10 million valuation for my Google? Let me just show you exactly how I go through so that I can share with you in our classes. Ready. That's right, you stay focused, you know where to hit, you know where to punch, and you know when to defend. That's your path towards 10 million. That's what we share in our classes. Now, until 2029. Then, so ladies and gentlemen, if you reckon you want to make a 10 million value on any stock or even the next just 1 million, well, do join us for our next class on the 15th of November, where actually we share with you the key dynamics, which are these stocks and they are identified for you, that are in a position to make you a 10 million proposition in time to come. What are the key physical, psychological, physiological, and fundamental and technical aspects to prepare you want for, as an investor, so that you can actually withstand all the noises between now holding your best favorite stock for the next 10 million proposal. So do sign up for our class on 15th November, where we share with you on this in the most competent, in the most honest, and in the most direct way that anybody can know how. Cheers then.